What if I told you that there's a filament that's nearly unbreakable, prints on a bed slinger without an enclosure, and costs a third as much as the premium stuff everyone keeps recommending? Or that the filament that everyone seems to write off as too hard to print has quietly become the most versatile, useful polymer in my arsenal? Because after testing over 100 filament types over the last 4 years, I can confidently tell you that the entire 3D printing community is sleeping on the same 5 materials. Not because they're hard to find, not because they're new or experimental or particularly expensive, but just because the stigma around them is completely outdated. So in this video, I'll share the 5 most underrated filaments that I keep coming back to when I actually need a part to survive. Not to look pretty on a desk, not to win a Reddit karma competition, but to expand the usefulness and application of 3D printing in solving real problems in my home, shop, and studio. Oh, and stick around to the end because the last one is a legit canon event that might just constitute as a midlife crisis. Let's get after it. First on our list, we have polyamide, also known as nylon. And to be honest, I've been saying for a couple of years at this point that nylon is due for a big renaissance. As far as plastics go, it's probably the most rugged, durable, and versatile material, at least among the commodity polymers that are used in everyday manufacturing. I mean, there's a reason that it's used for everything from parachute fabric to leggings to string trimmer line, all the way up to paracord. This stuff is incredibly strong. But for most consumer-level 3D printing enthusiasts, it's also really intimidating. It has a well-earned reputation for warping, it absorbs moisture like a sponge, and it likes to print very, very hot. If anything, people have grown accustomed to printing the more expensive but easier to print fiber-reinforced versions of nylons, eschewing the plain Jane versions altogether. So why does plain old PLA make this list of underrated filaments? And why do I feel like most people are completely sleeping on it? Well, to get the obvious one out of the way first, the 3D printer market has shifted quite a bit in recent years. Gone are the days when the average printer sold was an open bed slinger, and these days the vast majority of printers sold to hobbyists, or at least adult hobbyists, are actually enclosed core XY printers. And the truth of the matter is that nylon doesn't even need a heated chamber. It's perfectly happy with the heat generated by your heat bed. But even if you have an open printer or a bed slinger, you're actually still in luck. In recent years, there have been many meaningful developments, both in terms of accessories for printing nylon and in terms of the materials themselves. Take, for example, Magigoo PA, a formula that turns any old build plate into a nylon gripping machine. Now, you do still need to worry about the fumes, so you should have some sort of air filtration near the printer, and you do want to ventilate. But this technically does make it possible to print nylon on an open printer. They even have PA build plates, which make it fully possible, even easy, to print even the most delicate of nylon parts on an open printer. Just, again, remember to ventilate properly and do use air purification to get rid of fumes and VOCs. And even if you don't have one of those printers, there are now special formulations of nylon just for you. There's Sunlu's Easy PA, which is designed to warp less, and Polymaker's Co-PA, which I've actually printed many times on open printers with great success. Yes, nylon does take a little bit more care, consideration, and heat to print. You will, for example, need a good high-temp filament dryer, ideally one that can reach 80 or even 100 degrees Celsius to properly dry that nylon. But if you overcome the fear, the stigma, and the stereotypes, you'll discover an incredibly strong and versatile material that will greatly expand what you're able to do with 3D printing. Suddenly, things that you would never dream of 3D printing out of the normal materials become these useful, durable objects that you use and abuse every single day. From a bike lock mount that gets jostled hundreds of times every time you ride your bike, to a bump gate that gets smashed by toddlers day in and day out. Nylon is one of the few materials that can take this level of abuse if you give it the chance. Now, I say one of the few and not the only because there is, of course, TPU. A good high shore hardness TPU has always been the go-to for parts that need to take a licking for years. But up until recently, that came with a pretty big trade-off: rigidity. Even the highest hardness, most solid TPU parts will inevitably have a bit of flex. That is, until some crazy son of a biscuit decided to do the unthinkable: to take carbon or glass fibers and put them into TPU. Honestly, I can only imagine the funny looks and derision that one visionary had to endure during that initial meeting. Okay, come on, people. New filament types. Come on, talk to me. What if we made a filament that was just for printing shoes? Love it. Perfect. What if we did like glass fiber versions of popular filaments like ABS-GF or PETG-CF? Oh, that's good. I like it. I'm gonna take carbon fiber. Okay, I like where this is going. And put it into TPU. But in reality, these cursed combinations of either glass fiber or carbon fiber with TPU are a lot more sea salt in chocolate and less pineapple on pizza. It really does work. I mean, take it from me. Anything that can survive my 5-year-old's driving style is worthy of praise. No, TPU-GF and TPU-CF are not nearly as rigid as, say, the next filament on our list. In fact, it does sit somewhere between normal TPU and plain nylon. But what it does do is give you just enough rigidity while maintaining the things that TPU does best: unbreakable layer adhesion and unparalleled impact resistance. Plus, you're left with a semi-matte finish and some weight savings as bonuses. Obviously, as with all fiber-filled filaments, you will need a hardened steel nozzle to actually print these variants, but besides that, there really is no other special requirement. The only catch here is that these two different variants are still not available from all that many suppliers. There are a few smaller brands like 3DO, Extruder, Fiberlogy, and Soriatech who make either TPU-CF or TPU-GF, but none of the big names like Polymaker or Sunlu sell it just yet. But hey, if this is something that you'd like to see more filament brands do, make sure to drop a comment down below and let them know that you would vote with your wallet. But what if you want extreme rigidity and heat resistance? Sure, you could try out those top-of-the-line filaments that people are always talking about, you know, the PPA-CF or the PPS-CF. And those are absolutely awesome, and they offer mind-bending performance that really does justify the hype. But they're also prohibitively expensive, and they require much higher temperatures both on the hot end and in the chamber to get them to actually print well. Plus, due to their rigidity and brittleness, they can be a real pain to print on certain extruders or filament paths.
Don't break, don't break, don't break, don't break. Ah, broke.
But there is something nearly as good. A filament that not only offers much of the heat resistance and rigidity of those superpolymers, but also comes in at a fraction of the price. I'm talking, of course, of PETG-CF, or fiber-reinforced polycarbonate. Now, I'm not sure what association goes through your mind when you hear the words polycarbonate or PETG-CF, but I bet it's something along the lines of exotic, expensive, warpy, and hard to print. And if you were referring to its unadulterated pure variant, you'd be absolutely right. Plain PC can be a plain pain in the butt to print, and it really does best with an actively heated chamber. But much like how adding carbon fibers makes nylon into a whole different beast, the introduction of carbon fiber into polycarbonate is a real peanut butter meets chocolate situation. And no, I have no idea why I'm going with all these chocolate metaphors today. When you add carbon fiber to polycarbonate, you get less warping, lighter weight, a satin-smooth finish, and printability. My goodness, the printability. In fact, this stuff is actually so easy to work with that when I was touring Prusa's factory and print farm, I actually discovered that they are printing all of the PETG-CF parts used on their printers on open format bed slingers with industrial grade ventilation and air purification. Not Core 1s, not even enclosed Mark IV S's, they're just letting it all hang out. And it's working well enough to print literal tons of the stuff every single month.
Let me tell you, I have tried printing this otherwise wonderful model out of many different materials over the years, and usually these little loops, they just don't have the layer adhesion. And once you get a screw in there and bite the threads in, and then you apply some pressure to it, these little nubbins just snap. But polycarbonate does not have that issue. Oh man, that's perfect.
So the next time you want extreme rigidity, a heat deflection temp as high as 130 C, all for a price that won't break the bank, look no further than PPS-CF. If you can find it, that is, because this is another one where the underrated badge has once again led to it being underproduced and undermarketed. Try as I might, I really could only find a handful of small and mid-sized brands manufacturing it, such as Filaments, Spectrum Filaments, and YX Polymer, all three of which I've had great success with. So if you can find it in your local market for a reasonable price, this is one of those filaments that I strongly recommend you try out for your next demanding project. All right, so the next filament on our list is one that's honestly best used in combination with other filaments. So before I tell you what that filament is, let me go ahead and quickly thank this video's sponsor and the current reigning champion of accessible multi-material 3D printing, and that, as you guessed it, is Snapmaker. Now, you've no doubt heard me talk about the Snapmaker U1. You've heard many different creators gush about it for many, many months now, but what you might not have heard is that they actually just lowered the price back down to just $849. Now, personally, I think this printer was an absolute steal at $999, so I'm very, very comfortable highly recommending it to all of you at $849. And in case you're wondering, yes, every single one of the filaments on this list can be printed on the Snapmaker U1, even the Nylons and the PPS-CFs if you just put on a top hat and a hardened steel upgraded nozzle. And as you'll see in the next section, it really does a beautiful job of calibrating even the most difficult to print filaments that I kind of wouldn't recommend touching on a lot of other printers. Plus, with Snapmaker, you can actually feel good about your purchase, knowing that you're supporting a company that respects and supports both open source and also just consumer rights as a whole. Actually, they just announced their $150,000 Snapmaker Innovation Fund to encourage people to develop open source hardware and software on their ecosystem, which is just flippin' awesome if you ask me. So to pick up your very own Snapmaker U1, go ahead and hit the link in the description or hit the QR code appearing on screen now. Thanks again to Snapmaker for making this video possible. Now, let's get back to it. Switching gears from the rigid stuff, I want to talk a bit about flexibles. See, when I first started out in 3D printing just 5 short years ago, if you wanted flexible, your choices were basically TPU and, well, TPU. I actually still remember my disappointment the first time I tried printing something out of this material. Sure, it was flexible and rugged, but it lacked so many of the things that you would expect in a so-called flexible polymer. Honestly, the biggest disappointment, at least in my book, was just the texture. TPU has this smooth, very plasticky feel that makes it an awful choice in any situation where it's going to come into regular contact with skin. Plus, while it does squish under pressure, it also tends to stay squished, making it pretty poorly suited for any type of gasket or seal. Fortunately, these days we are spoiled for choice when it comes to flexibles. We have PEBAs, specialized TPEs, ultra-soft TPUs. Heck, we even have some flexible filaments specifically designed for printing wearables and shoes. And then there's a newer class of flexibles, the so-called air variants of TPU, PEBA, and TPE. And look, I'm not gonna lie, when Soraya Tech and Fadis sent me those initial rolls of sample filaments, I kind of thought that they were gonna be nothing more than a special purpose novelty. You know, something like tricolor filament that I'd print once or twice for the cool factor and then never touch again. But oh boy, was I wrong. And since discovering this stuff, I keep coming back to it again and again. Why, you might ask? Well, first, there's the skin feel. This stuff is really, really nice to touch. It's similar to that Ninja Tech Chinchilla TPE that I featured in one of the first videos in this series, but it's not nearly as much of a hassle to print. Second, there's the versatility. Because of the way it foams up, this filament acts as a stand-in for any application where you might want EVA foam. And that's not just seals and gaskets, but protective cushioning, insulation, and much, much more. And, I mean, with true multi-material printing becoming more and more accessible due to the rise of tool changers, the number of applications that I find for this filament has really, really increased. Third, there's the fact that it lasts like forever. See, because you're basically printing with 40% air, one spool of this stuff is going to last you for a long, long time. Unlike your standard TPU, which comes on a roll of 500 to 750 grams and gets used up pretty quickly because of the pretty high density. Now, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. I have found that these filaments take a fair amount of tuning to get right, at least if you're printing on a machine without that fancy auto PA calibration. For this reason, I personally choose to print these filaments on my Snapmaker U1s, which have really great auto calibration. But you can also just spend a bit of time manually tuning the filament on any of your other printers as well. Either way, this is one of those filaments that has dramatically expanded the range of applications for 3D printing in and around my workshop, but which I really don't hear people talking about nearly enough. So as with all of these filaments, we will leave a link in the description to some of my preferred suppliers for it, should you want to check out and support the channel in the process. And finally, we come to the end of our list, and I promise you that you'd be quite surprised at my pick, because unless this is your first time visiting my corner of the interwebs, you'll know that there are 3 things in the world of 3D printing that I hate more than anything: AGPL violators, Forca slicers, and, you guessed it, PETG. So I want you to just imagine for a second the existential, identity-rocking dissonance that I experienced when, over the last few months, I find myself loving the spawn of Satan himself. It's so beautiful. What does this mean? But it's made of PETG. It's made of the devil's plaything. What does this mean for me? Am I a sellout? Has big PETG Do I still even like women? Am I a fraud? What happens What's now? Next? Pineapple on pizza? This could cost me everything. How do I come out to my audience? I think I like PETG-CF. It started out with a single innocuous print, a multicolor PETG and PETG-CF upgrade that I wanted in a matte finish. But as soon as I saw the finish, that gorgeous satin surface, the rigidity, the feel, I knew that this material was different, that I could no longer make the cardinal error of judging the child for his father's sins. But all jokes aside, there are a number of things that make PETG-CF their very redemption of PETG. In fact, if you go down the list of things that I hate about PETG, which you guys always seem to ask me about in the comments, without fail, adding carbon fiber either ameliorates or completely eliminates every single one of them. The boogering effect on the nozzle, the here nor there level of rigidity, the hideous glossy finish, the abhorrent hygroscopy, and the resulting bubbly prints. It's all just so much better with PETG-CF. And while there have been recent exposés online about how adding carbon fiber to certain filaments like PLA actually weakens them, for the most part, the strength of PETG is largely unaffected by adding the black scratchy stuff. Plus, unlike many of the other filaments on this list, PETG-CF is A, widely available from a plethora of different manufacturers, and B, incredibly affordable. I mean, our new channel filament sponsor, Sunlu, actually sells it for $19.99 a kilo, and even the more expensive brands like Polymaker and Bamboo Lab sell it for under 30 bucks a kilo. Finally, unlike switching to PC-CF, with PETG-CF, you need no special equipment or conditions short of a hardened steel nozzle. So I'd actually go so far as to say that personally, at least for me, I would happily switch all of my PETG usage, albeit meager PETG usage, over to PETG-CF if there were more colors available from more manufacturers. Though generally speaking, you are better off just printing ABS or ASA rather than PETG if you have an enclosed and filtered build chamber that you can print it in. Now, I imagine that many of you will inevitably say that ABS and ASA are prone to warping, or that you've had other types of difficulties printing with it, or any other type of filaments that I've talked about on this list. So if you're on the fence about trying out a new filament, I would say go for it, but you'll probably want to check out this recent video that I did. In it, I share the 20 most common causes of print failures and imperfections, and I teach you how to quickly diagnose and solve every single one of them. We'll go ahead and link that video right here. Oh, and good news, by the way, we finally cracked the 30% ceiling of subscribed versus unsubscribed viewers. So thank you guys for that, and I'll try not to take it personally that 69% of you, obligatory giggity, are still somehow not subscribed. Anyways, that's all for this week, but I'll see all of you on the next layer.